Greetings to the community of Stellenbosch University, particularly the leadership of the School of Public Leadership. Distinguished guests, the representative of the Public Protector in the Western Cape, Advocate Janse van Rensburg, the German Consular General, and other distinguished guests in the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and a huge privilege to address this important conference. I'm grateful to Professor Schuela and his fellow organizers for giving me the opportunity to address another Stellenbosch University conference. Firstly, I would like to congratulate Professor Schuela and his colleagues at the University of Stellenbosch for initiating this dialogue on national development planning. I'm particularly encouraged by the fact that the conference brings together a great combination of those involved in applied development planning with those involved in research and thought leadership. In a column published earlier this month in the Mail and Guardian, the Rector and Vice Chancellor of the University of Stellenbosch, Professor Russell Botman, said the following about the National Development Plan. It is now opportune to amend Madiba's call for an RDP of the soul to an NDP of the soul. This time, though, civil society should unite to repair the moral fiber of society. It is a cause no less noble or urgent than the struggle against apartheid. About this, there should be no disagreement. Professor, the timing of the debate around the implementation of the National Development Plan is of great interest. As a people, we are moments away from celebrating the 20th anniversary of our hard-won democracy. In April 27 next year, our democracy will be turning 20. Together with other democracies, we are also a little more than a year away from the UN platform for reporting back on what we have achieved in the pursuit of Millennium Development Goals. These are the goals that, together with other countries, we committed ourselves in the year 2000 to achieve by 2015. As a country, we are also faced with the task of implementing our first ever integrated National Development Plan, what we refer to as the NDP. We also meet at a time when the presidency has brought to our attention the fact that the number of people in this country who live below the poverty line has increased from about 48% in 1996 to 52.3% in 2012. There's accordingly no better opportunity for reflecting on developmental planning and implementation than the present one. This is a good time for our country to look back at what we have done in the last 20 years, celebrate our successes, and look closely at our failures in preparation for the next phase. We're particularly looking at the extent to which we have achieved what is envisaged in our world-class constitution. You would know that our constitution promises the people of South Africa an improved quality of life and a freed potential of each person. That improved quality of life is anchored in a justiciable Bill of Rights, enshrining rights and freedoms that ought to be enjoyed by every single one of us. The rights include socioeconomic rights, such as the right to education, access to health care, economic activity, social security, and housing. The rights also include civil and political rights, such as the right to human dignity, the right to equality, freedom of association, and freedom of expression. In other words, the Constitution promises and envisions a new society that is a vast improvement from the one under apartheid. Underpinning the rights are values such as the achievement of equality, freedom, and human dignity. Ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me that at the core of the new society that the Constitution seeks to lay the foundation for is a decent life for every person by virtue of being a human being, without discrimination on the basis of race, gender, disability, age, socioeconomic status, nationality, or any other human condition. It is worth noting that the framers of our Constitution did not trust the inherited state apparatus to deliver on the constitutional vision. It was understood that a new state based on an ethos that is not at odds with the values and vision of the new society had to replace the old one. With this in mind, the Constitution defines and describes the character of the state that is required for the realization of the constitutional vision. The Constitution stipulates, among other things, that the state must be democratic, uphold the rule of law, and operate on the basis of openness, transparency, and accountability. The Constitution goes further in Section 96 to refer to the ethical standards which the executive should uphold. These standards include putting public interest first, above self-interest. In Section 195, the Constitution outlines the principles of public administration, emphasizing the non-negotiability of putting people first as opposed to self-interest. While in Section 237, the Constitution specifically directs that constitutional obligations are to be performed diligently and without delay. This means that before we take care of the nice to-dos or the interests of those in power, constitutional imperatives should be given priority. If you look closely at the constitutional provisions outlining the character of the state, you begin to see clearly the seeds of good governance. Such seeds become clearer when we look at Chapter 7, which specifically regulates local governance. The provisions of Chapter 7 include the following. I quote, "The objects of local government are A, to provide democratic and accountable government for local communities. B, to ensure the provision of services to communities in a sustainable manner. C, to promote social and economic development. D, to promote a safe and healthy environment. And E, to encourage the involvement of communities and community organizations in the matters of local government." I've always believed that if the provisions of Section 151 to 164 of the Constitution were internalized by local government functionaries, municipal structures would function more effectively. Needless to say that there would be less service delivery grievances and public protests. Governance has been defined by the World Bank as the manner in which power is exercised in the management of a country's economic and social resources for development. The United Nations Development Programme's definition of this concept is similar but deeper. I quote, "The exercise of economic, political, and administrative authority to manage a country's affairs at all levels within the rule of law and with consensus," close quotes. All these definitions encapsulate the spirit of the provisions of the Constitution that I have referred to earlier. What one could say in a nutshell, in order to make national development work, there must be good governance. What then are the good governance factors that need to be attended to as we go into the next 2 decades of democracy, or the second phase of Millennium Development Goals and the implementation of the National Development Plan? I can only share with you what I have learned in the last 4 years of being the public protector. It's been a long time, isn't it? You're probably aware that the public protector is established under Section 181 of the Constitution and given power under Section 182 to, I quote, "investigate any conduct in state affairs or in the public administration in any sphere of government that is alleged or suspected to be improper or to result in any impropriety or prejudice, to report on that conduct and to take appropriate remedial action," close quotes. However, many of you may not be aware that the Constitution envisages additional powers for the public protector as prescribed in national legislation. As we speak, these additional legislative powers, which have come from more than a dozen statutes, have caused my office to evolve into a multiple mandate or remit office, whose role includes playing a part in the anti-corruption architecture of South Africa. The key mandates of my office to date include the following. 1, maladministration mandate, which incorporates abuse of power and abuse of state resources under the Public Protector Act of 1995. 2, the sole enforcement agency for the Executive Ethics Code under the Executive Members Ethics Act of 1998. 3, an anti-corruption mandate deriving from improper conduct in Section 182 of the Constitution, maladministration under the Public Protector Act, and reference made to the Public Protector under the provisions of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act of 2004. 4, my office is a safe harbor for whistleblowers under the Protected Disclosures Act of 2000. 5, one of several information regulators under the Promotion of Access to Information Act. And 6, this office is the administrative review authority over decisions of the Home Builders Registration Council under the Housing Protection Measures Act. That's an odd power that I do not quite understand why should we exercise it. Incidentally, the NHRBC also agrees with us. The lessons I drove from come from cases we deal with on a day-to-day basis. These involve service failure and conduct failure. Service failure incorporates service delayed. Sorry, is that and switch it off. I thought as much. but was hoping that I was wrong, and so I sincerely apologize. I was at the point where I was explaining about the lessons I'm about to share with you. Where do they come from? They come from the work we do under all of these laws, and we divide the work we do into two categories: work involving service failure and work involving conduct failure. Service failure incorporates service delayed and service denied. Service delayed would include, for example, not getting your identity document on time and therefore having no life for a long, long time. Not getting your work permit or the renewal of your work permit or your residence permit. Not getting your workers' compensation for many, many years whilst being plunged into poverty. Not having access to water, electricity, housing, and being not paid for work done as a state contractor, or being not paid your allowance or final payments as a former employee of the state. These are just examples. When we talk about service denied, we're talking about a case where the administrators decide you will not get the decision, so you'll not get the service. So it's not a question of delay, but they decline your request, and you feel that the decision to decline the service is improper. This happens in cases such as social grants, outstanding fees that are owed to someone by the state, and outstanding pension funds, UIF, and things like that. When we talk about conduct failure, we are talking about misconduct. This would include abuse of state power, abuse of state resources, conflict of interest, various forms of unethical conduct, and bribery, together with other forms of corruption in state affairs. Some of the lessons I will talk about come from our interaction with stakeholders, primarily when we do our stakeholder consultations between July and September every year, and when we hold a Good Governance Week once every year around October 15th. I will now talk to you very briefly about the governance failures that need to be corrected if we are to improve our development planning in the next phase of our democracy. I have identified about 10 of them, but there's more. I just thought perhaps I could focus on some of the ones that keep recurring during our investigations and interface with stakeholders. The first one is inadequate connect or inadequate consultation or accountability between those that govern and those that give them the power to govern. It has led to an increasing trust deficit. If you scrutinize the e-toll debacle, for example, you'll agree with me that the problem primarily relates to communication. Government says it consulted, and the people say it didn't. The truth is they're both right. There was consultation, but it was not specific. I've heard from government that there was consultation during the Mandela time, and the consultation was about a user pay system, but even I, being a lawyer and educated, would not necessarily have understood that user pay system means e-toll. There would have been various options for a user pay system. So again, they're both right, but it's the quality of consultation that perhaps has caused the discord. Poor planning. Poor planning has become a problem primarily in local government, yet there are laws and policies that facilitate planning. For example, at local government, you are supposed to have an integrated development plan. an IDP. The failure there is usually twofold. The first part is the quality of consultations, where there aren't robust consultations with the communities. And secondly, after consultation, there's no going back to the community to say, not everything that you put on the wish list was included. So the communities think that everything that was put on the wish list is going to be delivered, and then later it turns out that it's not being delivered, and they think it was on the wish list. And often communities do not understand the difference between the wish list and the actual plan, which is the plan would have been adjudicated on the basis of prioritization and the question of availability of funds. But around poor planning, there's also the question of prioritization. There are cities today that will tell you that they don't have money for water. I've just been approached by people in Pretoria, some town, so a new informal sector that has been made in Mamelodi by the city. They are saying they've been told that they'll only have running water and electricity sometime next year. But that city has changed all of the streets, all of the street names, including Church Street. And that was paid for. Yet, I've read to you chapter 7 of the Constitution that says that it is the duty of local government to ensure the provision of services to communities in a sustainable manner, and to promote social and economic development, and to promote a safe and healthy environment. And then section 237 says constitutional responsibilities should be performed diligently and expeditiously. So you would have wanted to think that before we do the nice to-dos, we would have focused on basic needs. So that's poor planning on its own. Poor planning also involves what we refer to as demand management failure, where the state subcontracts the delivery of its work. But there's no management of demand. The state goes to the market with a blank check, and the service providers decide what is the scope of work and what is the amount of money. And in the end, you find that something that should have cost $1 million ends up costing $1 billion or more, because it was the service providers that decided the scope. Of course, the wider the scope, the more the money for them. That again is an issue of poor planning, because in terms of the law, you're supposed to plan, scope, and budget, and then only go to the market with something very clear around what you want to be done, within what timelines, and how much money are you going to spend on it. There's also poor execution. That also includes not complying with the law and failure to stick to plans. I spoke about local government having IDPs. National departments have strategic plans. But often things that are not on the strategic plan find themselves being given priority. And then those that were planned and that were supposed to meet basic needs end up not being serviced. There are allegations at the moment in the health sector, and it's not proven yet, that basic needs such as medicines and basic equipment have suffered because equipment that is world-class but not yet needed has been purchased ahead of what we need. And then often there are allegations around the fact that when people deviate from plans, it's often because there's been improper influence on them to deviate from the plan and to purchase something that may benefit them and may benefit whoever influenced them. Those allegations, in some cases they're proven, in some cases they have not been tested. Which brings me to problem number 4, which is corruption. Corruption corrupts development planning in many ways. the first thing is the whole question of policy. Policy can be corrupted again. The priorities can be corrupted, where there's improper influence and people are looking at self-interest as opposed to what is going to be benefited. And I'm not going to bore you too much about what is the impact of corruption, but rather just to talk about corruption being action that is taken not in the public interest, but action that is taken because somebody is influenced to benefit someone in order for them to be benefited as well. The Act calls it gratification, that you are influenced improperly for the benefit of gratification. And corruption, as we know, is a bilateral crime. It involves people in the public sector and people in the private sector. But also it often involves people, it's often a transnational activity. So it could be people here in South Africa who meet somebody in Europe who says, you need to have that thing in your country. You're not ready for it. You're still supposed to focus on priorities. But the person says, we can make it your while. Boom, it happens. And the project is running and it's paid for. The money goes away from the projects that were supposed to really happen. We've seen with stadia, at least it has been proven that there was collusion in those stadia. But also there has been foreigners who have come to our country and said, how could you build such beautiful stadia when there are people in your country that don't have homes, water or electricity? When there are still children that are learning under a tree or in classrooms with 4 to 5 classes grouped together. And we could have built beautiful stadia, but they didn't have to be better than anything else in the world. The fifth issue is leadership and skills deficit, exacerbated by constant loss of institutional memory. I think this one may have been attended to by the people that have spoke in the last day or so, that there's constantly weakening in the leadership within the public sector because everyone is coming in and leaving, and new people are being developed all the time, and often they're not ready to lead at the level they are appointed. And sadly, that applies across the board. And I will say that even at a political level, we don't have the ideal system. I have noticed and have been informed by my colleagues in other countries that usually for them, for example, to be a national minister, you would have started as being a chairperson of a school governing board. And then you became a mayor or some other important person in local government. Then you became somebody in the province. So you made small mistakes throughout your life and made small decisions, and your ability to make decisions and to understand the system increased over the years. By the time you become a minister, you are a seasoned person, and often people are taken straight from wherever they come from, and they have to. The first really management job they are going to have is being a minister. And that is, again, becomes an issue of leadership and skills deficit. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen. I'm just saying perhaps then there should be a gap analysis and closing that gap as soon as possible, because it will impact on the quality of decisions that are going to be made. There is, in many institutions, there is inadequate systems, including institutional policies and standard operational procedures. Some of the reports we've done on local government, Nala, Dipaliseng, and Olifantshoek, have shown that the inadequacy of policies, of systems, and standard operational procedures. Because even if there is no institutional memory or inadequate institutional memory, when there's standard operational procedures and they are in little booklets, it's easier for people to know what to do all the time. And, or it reduces the risk of wrongdoing. 7, there's a fragmented state. Like all other states, they're fragmented. However, that fragmentation needs to be managed from a planning point of view. And the NDP does actually address some of that. Because up until now, we have left behind communities. I mean, if you're going to, let's take Gauteng. You have fancy freeways. You have people that say, we're studying under a tree. So it can't happen in one country. where some freeways have been beautified, and there are people who are saying we have no school days because the roads are bad, and we don't go to school. People sometimes say they don't go to clinics because the ambulance can't come into their areas. It's one country, so ideally it shouldn't happen, but the NDP does address that, and that's a good thing about the question of integration of services. And then 8, inconsistencies in enforcement, marked by unacceptable levels of impunity and a fragmented integrity sector. We pride ourselves with having an extensive integrity sector. We have the police, the SIU, the Hawks, the Public Protector, Auditor General, Human Rights Commission, etc. But there are no rules on how to ensure that this operates as a seamless system, and often things fall through the cracks. We are, as a sector, trying to address that. However, when it comes to issues of corruption, we need to move faster than we are moving at the moment. Impunity is about when some people are responsible for wrongdoing, nothing happens to them. And when people who are not in inner circles of their organizations are responsible for wrongdoing, action is immediately taken against them. That corrupts the system, because then people know that all I need to do is to get into the inner circle and make sure that I'm safe. In fact, a young person said to me recently that some organizations, and I won't say which ones, operate like a pyramid scheme. If you just know your place in the pyramid scheme and you support the pyramid, whatever the leadership is in the pyramid, your time will come to keep going up and up and up. And that is a problem because in other countries, like Singapore, when there's wrongdoing, there's wrongdoing. You can be a minister or anyone. You can be a clerk or a minister. When there's wrongdoing, there's wrongdoing. And there's no impunity. 8, we have rule of law challenges. Not that much. Our courts are functioning perfectly. Of course, there are delays here and there because of the fact that we haven't automated these very huge case systems. But where there's rule of law challenges, it's in the area of the other parts of the Constitution that are not court-related, but they're part of the rule of law. Chapter 9 is one of those. It's an innovation that seeks to strengthen and support constitutional democracy. But for Chapter 9 and Chapter 10 to play their role effectively, there needs to be broader understanding of their place in democracy. I often complain about what I refer to as pre-constitution thinking, where we still only think about the old checks and balances, and we don't seem to understand that room has to be made for what we inserted under Chapter 9, Chapter 10, and insofar as the Inspector General of Intelligence is concerned, Chapter 11. I could speak a lot about the misunderstandings. I just would say that the debate that the academic community can contribute towards is the issue of checks and balances. And I've indicated that many of us are stuck in what we refer to as pre-constitution thinking. I would say new institutions or sui generis institutions, such as the Public Protector South Africa, are not fully understood. Because there's always looking at comparing them with the courts and trying to make them some version of the courts or some dysfunctional version of the court. They're not meant to be courts. They're not tribunals. It is an institution sui generis. The other thing that complicates it is the Public Protector is an institution borrowed from Europe. So it operates like the judicial system in Europe. We know that our judicial system here is a common law judicial system. In Europe, it's a civil judicial system, where your judge is both the investigator and the judge in an inquisitorial system. And that creates problems of misunderstanding. I've heard people saying, I had one minister who wrote back to us recently, and we were shocked, totally shocked, that I do not agree with your suggestions, and I have already made my decision based on my powers. I do not agree with your suggestions, and I consider the matter closed. That was the first time in 4 years. And it's coming from a minister, and that's where I'm talking about, again, the level of people understanding the system they operate in. Because I would expect a minister to understand that I have constitutional power to scrutinize her decisions, and I have constitutional and statutory power to make a finding of wrongdoing if I so believe. If, of course, I am wrong in so finding, it's not for her to say, case closed. Section 181 is very clear that these institutions are subject only to the Constitution and the law. And it's not just about the public protector. The IEC, for example, has the power to make a determination whether the elections were free or not free. Whether they were free and fair or they were not free. Case closed. If you're not happy, you can't sit and say, no, I disagree with you, I'm going to do my own thing. You have to take them to court. It's all under Section 181. And I'm glad that the Minister of Public Service and Administration has said that she's including a course for ministers and parliamentarians in the new in the new government school, because we really all need to read from the same page around the question of public scrutiny. That people have powers, but the concept of checks and balances mean that those powers are not exercised without scrutiny. They can be scrutinized, and somebody who's authorized can say you were wrong. And you're not the one to tell them that I have a final say. Somebody else, which would be the courts, will then decide if they're right. But they're not making a suggestion, they're making a decision as empowered by the Constitution and the law. But because of these misunderstandings, the potential of these institutions to help the state in pursuit of good governance is not fully exploited. And in the Inkandla matter, for example, there has been an argument that the power to decide on security matters is the power of Parliament and the Cabinet. That's true. Just as it's the power of the Minister of Health to make decisions around health policy, etc. But the power to scrutinize whether they acted within their authority belongs to me, belongs to other Chapter 9 institutions, and ultimately to the courts. So people get confused between that. The power to make the decision in the first instance, and then the power to be held accountable by an institution that is given the authority to scrutinize whether or not you exercised your power within the law and strictly in accordance with the law or instruments that empower you. And that again is an area of misunderstanding. So for me, as I've indicated, the power to determine whether or not that power was exercised in accordance with the law belongs to the public protector and other competent bodies, ultimately the courts. That is the impact of the additional checks and balances that the framers of our Constitution added in order to reinforce our constitutional democracy. As it was a constant choice, if you look at the certification case where the courts, where it was argued in court that there weren't enough protections or guarantees for the public protector, one of the arguments made there by or of the statements made by the court in Obiter was the value of these institutions, that they were going to exercise enormous power and they were going to scrutinize government and sometimes to make embarrassing decisions. And that's why they needed to be protected. But that doesn't mean people shouldn't exercise their powers. It just means they should exercise their powers with the understanding that they will be held accountable. And the accountability, a member of parliament said recently to me, accountability is hierarchical. Again, that's pre-constitution thinking. Accountability is not hierarchical. Some accountability is vertical, some accountability is horizontal. A traffic officer may not be senior than me, but when I'm on the road, he's in charge. When he says stop, I must stop. It doesn't mean he's my boss. It just means he has been given the authority to decide compliance with road traffic rules. And that's a mentality that we need to get people to understand going forward. President Nelson Mandela once said, I quote, "The purpose that will drive this government shall be the expansion of the frontiers of human fulfillment, the continuous extension of the frontiers of freedom, and the continuous extension of the frontiers of freedom." The acid test of the legitimacy of the programs we elaborate, the government institutions we create, the legislation we adopt, must be whether they serve these objectives. My government's commitment to create a people-centered society of liberty binds us to the pursuit of the goals of freedom from want, freedom from hunger, freedom from deprivation, freedom from ignorance, freedom from suppression, and freedom from fear. These freedoms are fundamental to the guarantee of human dignity. When we started, I spoke about the importance of good governance in ensuring that the constitutional dream or the constitutional promises are made real for every person in this country. As a pillar of good governance, one of the key pillars of good governance is clean governance. By its very nature, clean governance includes zero tolerance to corruption. Corruption is one of the key enemies of development. Its outcomes include distorted policies, unplanned and unneeded projects, overbilling, false billing, overcharging, escalating charges, and shoddy work. Corruption also creates an unsustainable investment climate and an unsustainable entrepreneurial environment. I must indicate, though, that excellent work is being done by various agencies in government to combat corruption. Among those agencies is the Department of Public Service and Administration, which has created, among other things, an anti-corruption bureau. The Special Investigation Unit has been doing splendid work. The Department of Justice has decided to go on a naming and shaming process. The National Treasury has implemented a whole lot of measures that seek to ensure that money issued by the Treasury is spent prudently and in accordance with the law. What is needed, though, going forward is consistency. We also need to close gaps caused by the multi-agency approach to corruption. While all of these are important, though, it is critical to mention that it should not be left to the state to ensure good governance alone. It must be understood that development should be the pursuit of everyone, with the state primarily acting as an enabler and regulator. However, as a developmental state, our state must directly engage in the delivery of basic needs such as water, health, education, infrastructure, and to a limited extent, housing. Ultimately, the better life promised by the Constitution can be better and speedily achieved through enhanced good governance and development planning. This will ensure that people are enabled to fend for themselves, while those who can't look after themselves are taken care of. We all have roles in this regard. If we play our part, we will ensure that in the next 20 years, ours is a state that is accountable, operates with integrity at all times, and is responsive to the needs of all the people. As we move forward on the question of making national planning work by anchoring it in good governance, I suggest we borrow wisdom from the following Chinese proverb. I quote, "The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now." Thank you.